Katie listened. Eventually, Lottie said, I know what I need to think about. This issue holds me back in my business and my life. It affects everything. She paused. They both were quiet. I have swept it aside several times, she said, and maybe I should this time too. She paused again. She looked around the room. It feels dangerous. I feel I have no right to think about it. She was quiet. Katie was quiet. Then Lottie said, I am aware that I am the only German in this group, and I know that Miriam is a Jew. I also know that she is the daughter of Holocaust survivors. A few minutes passed. Lottie's silent thought permeated the room. Eventually, she spoke again. I feel it is impossible to find the right words, but for my whole life, I have needed to try to think about this topic, to talk about it, without being judged. I think it could be possible here, but I'm not sure. She looked around the group. Everyone was attentive, interested. Their faces were open, encouraging. No one spoke. I am 40 years old now, Lottie said. When I was a child, I learned that the Germans committed the most awful crime in history, and that all Germans are guilty as a nation. We inherited this guilt, and were taught that there is no way to remove it without forgetting what happened. Every child was taught that, and so were my parents when they were young. The Germans alive then and born later and still to be born, we all are guilty. We were confronted with this in every subject we were taught. She stopped. She breathed. She looked at Katie. Katie kept her eyes on Lottie's eyes, with interest, respect, no judgment, no rush, no questions. What they said was that at all cost we must never forget, so that it can never, ever happen again. And of course, that is right. But they said that the way to keep the memory alive is to accept the guilt. And every attempt to talk about it was seen as negating the scope of the atrocities. I went to the concentration camp at Dachau with my parents and later to Auschwitz on my own to confront myself with our history. Lottie was suddenly quiet. She looked down, and then at Katie. That's all for the moment, she said. And Katie asked gently and slowly, what more do you think, or feel, or want to say? In the front of the house where we live now, Lottie said, there is a Stolperstein, the brass memorial plaque commemorating two people who lived in our house before they were deported to Auschwitz. My son is 4 years old. Together, we polish the Stolperstein. We put flowers and candles there to commemorate the date of their death. We want to keep this memory alive. Those two people who used the same front door as we do today. But I struggle to know how to explain to my son what happened. I want him to understand and to stay alert, but without the guilt. She nodded. That's all. Katie waited and then asked again, and what more do you think, or feel, or want to say? Nothing, Lottie said. That's really all for the moment. Katie and Lottie looked warmly at each other. And slowly Katie said, we still have some time. What more, if anything, would you like to accomplish with our session? Lottie thought for a while. I would like to find a way towards healing, Lottie said. She stopped. I'm not even allowed to have that goal, she said. She was quiet for a while. Yes, she said, that is what I want next to accomplish in this session. I want to find a way towards healing. Gently, Katie asked Lottie, what might you be assuming that is stopping you from finding a way towards healing? I am assuming, Lottie said, that this can't be healed. The Holocaust has created an eternal guilt. I am assuming that to heal is to risk its happening again. Katie then asked slowly and gracefully, and what else might you be assuming that is stopping you from finding a way towards healing? I assume that I deserve to feel guilty. Lottie stopped. She looked at Katie. Her warmth, their quiet, were symbiotic forces. Lottie cried a bit. That is the main assumption, Lottie said. And do you think it's true, Katie asked gently, that you deserve to feel guilty? Yes, I do, Lottie said. She was silent, and so was Katie. A few weeks ago, Lottie said, I got to read letters between my grandparents. I was terrified I would discover that they had been Nazis. I read and read, and soon I cried. They had not been Nazis, but they had not been heroes either. My friend Stefan also found the letters of his grandmother. You were lucky, he said to me. I discovered that my beloved grandma was a committed Nazi, and that was the worst day of my life. Lottie paused, breathed, looked at Katie. I believe that my ancestors are in me, Lottie said. Without them, I would not exist. To be complete as a person, I must integrate inside me my ancestors and their heritage. And what do I transmit to my children if I don't find a way of healing from our history? When I have a conflict with my son, I tell him I disapprove of his action, but I love him. And why should that not apply even to the most monstrous criminals? I condemn their actions with my whole being, but who am I to judge the inherent person? Lottie was quiet again. Then she said softly, No, maybe actually it is not true that I deserve to feel guilty. She looked out towards the river. Then she looked back at Katie. Katie said gently, So, as it is not true that you deserve to feel guilty, what do you think is true and liberating instead? Lottie thought for a long time. I'm thinking about forgiveness, she said. I was taught that to forgive is dangerous because to forgive is to forget. But is it true that to forgive is to forget? She thought in silence. After nearly a minute, she spoke. No, she said slowly. To forgive is to love. Love helps us remember, maybe even more accurately, and then to live differently. If we don't forgive, what is the future? She thought more. No one moved. Lottie said, Could you please ask me again, Katie? Of course, she said. As it is not true that you deserve to feel guilty, what do you think is true and liberating instead? Lottie thought for a while. My ancestors, she said, deserve to be forgiven. She cried. And then she nodded. That's all. Katie waited and then spoke softly. If you knew that your ancestors deserve to be forgiven, how would you find a way towards healing? Lottie again was quiet. Eventually, she spoke. Forgiveness is a way towards healing, she said. It integrates a dark side of myself. It brings relief and connection to my grandparents' generation. It empties a gap filled with silent sadness, shame, and trauma. She paused. Could forgiving, Lottie wondered out loud, be the condition for real peace? She thought for a while. That's all, she said. But because people often can generate more, Katie asked again, if you knew that your ancestors deserve to be forgiven, how else would you find a way towards healing? I would be more loving and powerful in my work, Lottie said. She sighed. Her shoulders eased. And then the time was up. She smiled. Katie smiled too.